A black woman quietly scrubs the floors of a luxury jetliner, just another cleaner to the flight crew who barely notice her. But what they don't know is that she's not who she seems. In just 72 hours, she'll walk back onto that same plane, not with a mop, but with the power to rewrite their futures. Ignored, dismissed, disrespected. But then, she becomes their CEO. What happened next exposed the hidden prejudice inside a billion-dollar company and sparked a transformation no one saw coming. Stay with me, because this is a story you need to hear. Before we dive in, tell me, where in the world are you watching from today? And if this story moves you, don't forget to hit subscribe, because real change begins when truth is seen. It was just another ordinary flight, until the cleaner became the boss. There is something about America, something we've always known, that loves to speak of equality while stepping around it like a puddle in a polished hallway. At JFK International, the floor gleams so bright you might mistake it for dignity. But not everyone who walks across it is seen. Clara DeWitt, a name you won't find on any of the welcome plaques, no gold pin on her lapel, no warm voice over the intercom. Just a mop in her hand, a badge that says custodial, and skin that tells a longer story than any resume ever could. She moved through the first-class cabin like a shadow on marble. The carpet caught none of her weight. The people, those well-heeled, well-traveled men and women sipping pre-flight champagne, didn't catch her name, didn't see her eyes. But Clara was watching. A blonde attendant, her smile a practiced smirk, spoke without looking. "This bathroom needs to sparkle. First class doesn't wait." Clara nodded. Not because she agreed, but because in a country like this, where your worth is measured by who calls you ma'am and who calls you girl, nodding can buy time. The first challenge came not in words, but in glances. A pilot brushed past her, muttering something about cleaning crew in the way. His tone landed heavier than his step. Clara just moved aside, mop in hand, heart still steady. She had lived long enough to know, the first slap of injustice never comes with noise. It comes dressed in silence. Later, in the staff corridor, two flight attendants laughed too loudly. You'd think with all the DI talk they'd hire cleaners who speak real English. She's probably one of those consultants in training programs, trying to pretend like they belong. Laughter again. Short, sharp, the kind that cuts without drawing blood. Clara looked down at her shoes, the same pair she wore the day she defended her Harvard thesis. Yes, Harvard. Yes, she belonged. But you see, belonging in America has never been about truth. It's about perception. And perception, my dear reader, is the first gate racism guards with both charm and cruelty. By the end of her shift, Clara had logged every name, every gesture, every disregard. Because here's what they never teach you in civics class. Power doesn't just wear suits and ties, it also wears dismissive grins and policy silence. She walked to the locker room, changed out of her uniform, and stepped into herself again. Tomorrow, she will board the plane not as a cleaner, but as a first-class passenger. She wouldn't raise her voice. She wouldn't throw back their words. She would sit, smile, and watch. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one writing the ending. There are moments in this country, this well-lit land of opportunity, when you realize the game was never about merit. It was always about masks. And Clara DeWitt was about to test just how deep the mask went. She returned to the airport not as the cleaner, but as the customer. A black woman in a tailored coat. Hair down. Eyes calm. Passport in hand. A first-class ticket paid in full. And still, they saw her, not as she was, but as they were trained to see her. She approached the gate, and the air shifted. "Ma'am, this line is for first class only," said David, the flight attendant from yesterday, his voice polite, but his eyes guarded. Clara offered her ticket, steady and without apology. David's hand trembled for a second as he scanned the barcode. I didn't realize." Of course he didn't. Because what America teaches, beneath its slogans and salutes, is that some bodies are always questioned. Some names always doubted. Some women, no matter how poised, will always be asked to prove they belong. Clara stepped into the first-class lounge and took her seat, not just in leather and glass, but in disruption. It wasn't long before whispers rose like steam from an engine. "She must be someone's guest," one man muttered. "Maybe she won a promotion," said a woman in pearls, not unkind, but unmistakably patronizing. Not a single soul asked her name, because to ask would require seeing her. David passed by again, all smiles now, syrupy with the kind of courtesy that comes after the mistake. The kind that says, "Now that I know you're someone, I'll be kind." But Clara did not return the smile. Not out of rudeness, but out of truth. Because smiles, like currency, lose value when offered too late. Across the lounge, she spotted Brittany, the blonde attendant from the bathroom, now rehearsing her charm for the white businessman seated near the champagne bar. She walked past Clara without a glance again. But this time, Clara was dressed in power. And still, she was invisible. It is here, dear reader, that the contradiction sharpens. In a country that insists race no longer matters, we still measure worth by how fast a smile is returned, how quickly suspicion melts, and how comfortably someone in uniform pretends you aren't a disruption in their script. Clara pulled out her phone and typed a quiet note. Respect should not depend on recognition. Nor should dignity require disguise. The challenge wasn't just that they didn't see her. The challenge was that even when they did, they didn't want to. The great lie of flight is that once you're in the air, you've left the weight of the world behind. But altitude doesn't erase injustice. It only gives it new uniforms, tighter scripts, and smiling faces trained to deny it. Clara DeWitt stepped onto the aircraft like any other first-class passenger. But unlike the rest, she carried with her a lifetime of being watched but unseen, a paradox so many Black Americans know too well. David, now playing the charming steward, gestured to her seat with a tight smile. "Welcome aboard, Miss DeWitt. May I take your coat?" "I'll keep it," Clara replied, her tone calm, her eyes sharp. He nodded, but she saw the flicker, that glance. The kind that says, "I'm still trying to figure out who you are and whether you're allowed to be here." She sat down. First-class seat. Champagne offered. Silk pillow tucked behind her back. And yet, the air pressed down, not from lack of oxygen, but from the performance surrounding her. From the corner of her eye, Clara watched Brittany move through the cabin like a machine, her smile reserved for the familiar, her voice warm only for certain passengers. With others, those with accents, darker skin, less obvious wealth, her words clipped, eyes glazed. Not hostile. Just hollow. That's how racism has evolved, you see. It doesn't always need slurs anymore. It just withholds kindness. It withholds patience. It withholds presence. Clara observed. Noted. Remembered. Then there was May, the young Asian flight attendant with soft eyes and steady hands. When she served Clara her meal, she bent slightly, not submissively, but with quiet care. "Would you like your wine opened, Miss DeWitt?" "Yes, thank you, May," Clara answered, emphasizing her name like a prayer. For a split second, May looked surprised. Heard. And Clara understood, it wasn't just blackness that was invisible in this space. It was anyone not born into comfort. Anyone expected to serve, not speak. Later, Clara watched David practically fawn over a man in 1D, white, loud, and full of the kind of entitlement money breeds. The kind that assumes the world is a waiting room and he is the appointment. David laughed at every joke, touched his shoulder, called him sir, 3 times in 2 sentences. But when the woman too rose back, brown-skinned, maybe Indian, asked for another blanket, David didn't hear her the first time. Didn't hear her the second. Only when she said, "Excuse me, sir," with the edge of someone who has long been ignored, did he turn, hand already halfway to no. Clara wrote that down too. Because what she saw wasn't new, it was America, 39,000 feet up. And as high as the plane flew, the hierarchies stayed grounded. She reclined her seat and closed her eyes. But her mind was still moving. They had all greeted her with manners, but not respect. They had served her, but not welcomed her. Because deep down, Their training couldn't imagine that someone like her didn't come with someone else's permission. And yet, she would soon be the one signing their paychecks. But not yet. Let them keep playing their parts. Because justice, when it comes slowly, comes with teeth. They say the captain is the last authority in the sky. That once the wheels lift off the ground, his word becomes law. But law, like power, has never been neutral. It moves differently depending on who holds it and who stands in its shadow. Clara DeWitt, dressed in patience and quiet observation, watched him enter the first-class cabin like a general inspecting his troops. Captain Richard Calloway, tall, silver at the temples, posture sharp like a blade too proud to admit rust. He wore his years like medals and spoke with the crispness of someone who believed in the system because it had always believed in him. "Welcome aboard," he said to each passenger, shaking hands with the white men, nodding briskly at the white women, and offering a smile so perfectly measured it never touched the eyes. When he reached Clara's row, he paused. She met his gaze, not confrontational, but unflinching. And that, more than anything, unsettled men like him. "Miss," he glanced at her boarding pass, the hesitation microscopic, but it was there, the moment of suspicion. "DeWitt," Clara offered. "Clara DeWitt." "Pleasure to have you with us," he replied, voice even, smile taut. "If there's anything you need." But they both knew he wasn't used to women like Clara sitting in seats like these without a husband beside them or a company logo to explain their presence. She nodded, offering no more than what was owed. As he moved on, Clara returned to her notepad, not with vindictiveness, but precision. She was not here to punish. She was here to remember. And remembering in a country built on forgetfulness is a radical act. Later in the flight, after the meal trays had been cleared and the cabin lights dimmed, May passed by again. "Would you like tea, Miss DeWitt?" "Yes, thank you." Clara took the cup, but this time she leaned forward, voice low, eyes kind. "You do excellent work, May." "I noticed." May blinked. "Thank you," she whispered, as if no one had ever told her that before. Not like that, not as if it meant something. And maybe it hadn't. Because in this system, excellence from people like May is expected, but never praised. It's borrowed, but never rewarded. Like everything else built on silent labor. But not for long. Hours passed. The plane soared through the night sky, but Clara's thoughts didn't rest. She thought of how many Captain Calloways she'd encountered in her career, men who'd never said the word racist, never raised their voice, never touched her skin, but still found 100 ways to remind her she didn't belong. Men who called themselves professionals while refusing to see certain people as their equals. Men who didn't burn crosses, but built ceilings. She thought of what would happen when he found out. When all of them did. That the cleaner they ignored was the woman who would sign off on their future. That the one they dismissed would be the one to decide if they stayed. But not yet. No, tonight was for watching. For remembering. For listening to the tone beneath the tone, the pauses revealed more than the words spoken. Because prejudice, like turbulence, isn't always loud. Sometimes it hides in the smooth ride, in the calm voice, the smile, the nod. But Clara had flown through worse storms. And she wasn't afraid of the altitude. The real test of a nation's soul is not in how it treats the exceptional, but how it regards the ordinary. And too often in America, a black woman in a cleaning uniform is granted neither. Clara DeWitt, now back on the ground in London, stepped through the doors of Skyward Airline's corporate offices with the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen the machine from beneath its belly and knew exactly where the rot began. She wasn't wearing her cleaner's uniform now. She wore power like a tailored suit, modest in fabric, but sharp in line. Still, the echoes followed her. Because in America, and in the corporations she seeds across the globe, even power worn by a black woman must pass a silent test. Is she here by accident? Was she invited? Who does she belong to? At the front desk, a white receptionist glanced up, did a double take, then stood a little too straight. "May I help you?" "You may," Clara replied. Clara DeWitt. "I have an appointment with Mr. Harrington." There was a beat, just one, before the woman checked her screen and nodded. Yes, Miss DeWitt. He's expecting you. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent, but Clara could feel the weight of the air shift with each level. The higher you went, the more exclusive the language became, the more white the walls, the more narrow the imagination. William Harrington, Skyward's UK operations director, met her with a handshake that tried too hard. A man who'd heard rumors but never believed the whisper until it stood before him in black skin and authority. Miss DeWitt. A pleasure. I've read your file. Have you read your staff's? She asked, sitting before being offered. He blinked. That was the beginning of the unraveling. For the next hour, she moved through data with the precision of a surgeon and the cool of someone who's been dismissed often enough to know how to hide the blade. Captain Calloway, she said, has a spotless safety record. He's also built a hierarchy so rigid it cuts off any possibility for honest growth. His version of excellence looks a lot like favoritism in uniform. Harrington cleared his throat. He's respected. By whom? Clara asked, folding her hands. Respect earned by intimidation isn't respect. It's fear. And fear doesn't build strong teams. It just builds silence. She laid out names. David Mitchell, whose charm dripped only for certain passengers. Brittany Parker, who smiled for the camera but glared off stage. And then Mei Jiang, the only one who moved with real care, whose performance wasn't manufactured but rooted in dignity. I watched them all, Clara said. Not from the boardroom. From the belly of your machine. She paused, letting the silence stretch. I scrubbed your floors. I cleaned your bathrooms. I wore the uniform they ignored. And what I saw should concern you. Harrington was pale now. Not from fear, but from realization. Because he, like so many in power, had never looked down without assuming superiority. Never considered that the person handing him a mop might one day hold the keys. Clara stood, gathering her notes. This isn't about revenge. It's about standards. The ones you preach, but don't practice. She turned at the door. And William, for the record, the hallways of this place, still smells like bleach. Because the people who clean them do so without applause. But they're the ones holding up your image. She left him there, standing in glass and silence, wondering how he'd failed to see the storm gathering in his own reflection. The most dangerous kind of racism doesn't yell. It whispers. It smiles. It shakes your hand at 30,000 feet and buckles you into your place with policies wrapped in pleasantries. Clara DeWitt, freshly returned from London, stepped aboard the return flight to New York not as a cleaner, not even as a silent passenger, but as a woman watching the system from inside its own theater. Her seat was an economy, this time by choice. She had traded in her first-class champagne for recycled air and narrowed legroom, because the truth doesn't always wear silk, and dignity is just as fragile in the back of the plane. But what she saw in coach told a fuller story than the polished quiet of the premium section ever could. David Mitchell moved through the aisle like a man late for a meeting he didn't want to attend. His tone clipped, his eyes already deciding which passengers were worth effort. He smiled at the tall white banker in 26C, nodded curtly at the young mother in a hijab, ignored the older black woman trying to ask a question about the meal. Clara saw it all. Not the moments themselves, but the pattern. The rhythm of disregard. The choreography of exclusion. Brittany Parker followed behind with an elegance that looked professional until you noticed who she skipped over. Until you watched her smile only when someone matched her mirror. Meanwhile, Mei Jiang, still quiet, still poised, served everyone the same. Not with robotic efficiency, but human grace. She remembered names. Helped with a tray before being asked. Took a moment to ask the man in the aisle seat how his day was, and waited for the answer. That, Clara knew, was the difference. Some people performed care, but May practiced it. Then it happened. An elderly South Asian woman asked David if there was a vegetarian meal available. Her voice was accented but clear. David sighed. Meal selections are made in advance, ma'am. She tried again. But I didn't know. I cannot eat this. He shrugged, already turning. Clara felt the burn crawl up her spine. Not rage, no. Not yet. What she felt was recognition. This was how it always began, a small humiliation designed to be unnoticeable to everyone but the one who receives it. But then, like breathing in a still room, May returned. She had overheard. Without fanfare, she went into the galley, returned with an alternate meal, and knelt beside the woman with quiet dignity. "We keep a few extras for situations like this," she whispered. "You're not an inconvenience. Please enjoy." Clara watched the older woman smile, press her hand to her chest, and say thank you with a gratitude so profound it nearly broke Clara's composure. Because that was all it ever took, one act of care in a system built to ignore. By the time the plane began its descent, Clara had written down everything. Not just names, but truths. Not just mistakes, but patterns. She was not just gathering evidence. She was gathering the soul of the company. Because the injustice wasn't just in David's tone or Brittany's silence. It was in the structure that rewarded them. The culture that protected them. The airline that praised performance but punished authenticity. She looked out the window as New York's skyline approached. A city built on ambition, but still filled with buildings where the higher the floor, the fewer the people who looked like her. But the sky belonged to no one. And soon, neither would Skyward Airlines. America has a habit of misreading who holds the broom and who holds the pen. And in corporate America, that misreading becomes ritual, where uniforms define worth and color defines place. But sometimes, the broom sweeps back. It was 9 a.m. sharp when the doors to the Skyward Airlines conference room closed. The hum of whispered rumors filled the air like static. The staff, executives in suits, senior pilots in crisp navy, flight crew in regulation smiles, gathered with anticipation and unease. They'd been told there was an important announcement. They hadn't been told they were the subject of it. And then, Clara DeWitt walked to the podium. No uniform this time. No accent to thicken, no mop in her hand. Just presence, quiet, composed, unshakably black and undeniably in charge. David Mitchell blinked. Brittany Parker froze mid-sip. Captain Calloway, seated near the front, adjusted his posture, ever the performer, but even he couldn't hide the flicker of recognition behind the practiced calm. Clara began. "My name is Clara DeWitt. As of today, I am the new Chief Executive Officer of Skyward Airlines." Silence. Not shock, comprehension. Because what stung wasn't that she had risen. It was that she had been among them, unacknowledged, invisible, and they had made her so. She let the moment hang. "I have walked your corridors, sat in your cabins, cleaned your floors, and I've seen exactly who you are when you think no one's watching." Her voice was gentle, but it cut. She didn't need to yell. The truth doesn't require volume. It only needs to be undeniable. I watched how respect was rationed, how smiles were selective, how service changed depending on who was seated in which row and who wore which skin. She paused, looking directly at David, at Brittany, at Calloway, without naming them. "I watched some of you perform excellence for those who looked like you, and ration dignity for those who didn't. Some shifted in their seats. Others stared at the table. But I also watched those who carried dignity into every aisle, who offered care not because they were watched, but because they knew their work mattered. I saw those who served with grace, even as they were overlooked." Clara then did something they didn't expect. She smiled. "This is not a speech about punishment. This is about reckoning. And that, my friends, is far more enduring." She laid out her plan: new promotion structures, transparent reviews, values-driven hiring, mentorship across identity lines. The room tightened as those who had hidden behind seniority realized the mirror was now facing them. And then, like a benediction, she said, "Going forward, excellence will not be determined by who you impress in first class. It will be measured by how you treat the person whose name you never learned, because you assumed they were beneath your attention." As the meeting ended, people filed out, some humbled, some afraid. But Clara wasn't there to comfort them. She was there to tell the truth. And in telling it, she restored something more valuable than control. She restored balance. Every empire resists its own reckoning. And every reckoning begins with someone the empire forgot. By Monday morning, the name Clara DeWitt was no longer whispered, it was spoken with either reverence or fear. She had not just entered the halls of Skyward Airlines, she had changed the temperature of the air inside them. But systems are stubborn things. They do not fall at the sound of one woman's voice, no matter how clear. They tremble only when the ground beneath them begins to shift. Clara arrived early, again not for theatrics, but to prepare for the real work. She carried no entourage, no briefcase full of threats. Only a folder marked performance and patterns, and the memory of 1,000 moments when she was made to feel small in plain sight. She met first with Captain Calloway. He stood as she entered. Out of respect, yes, but also self-preservation. "Captain," she nodded. "Madam CEO," he replied, smoothing his tie. What followed was not confrontation, but clarity. She spoke of leadership, not rank. Of excellence without arrogance. She laid out the facts, not rumors, not innuendo, facts. Complaints ignored. Promotions steered. A culture curated for comfort, not fairness. He listened. Or at least, he pretended to. But Clara knew men like him. Men who believed they were the system, and so could not imagine it without themselves at its center. And so, she made it plain. "You have two options," she said. "Grow with us or stand aside." There was no rage in her voice, no glee in her eyes. Just a calm certainty that comes only when a woman has walked through every door they tried to bar her from, and now holds the keys. Later, as Clara walked the corridors, she stopped by the crew lounge. Mei Jiang, now in her new senior uniform, stood briefing a group of younger flight attendants. Her voice was steady, her instructions clear. But when she saw Clara, her breath caught. Clara smiled. "I wanted to congratulate you in person, Mei. You earned this." Mei blinked, then said softly, "I didn't think anyone noticed." "Oh, we noticed," Clara replied. "They just chose not to see." And that was the truth, wasn't it? People like Mei had always been there, holding it all together. Invisible until seen. Dismissed until needed. Resilient without applause. But now the applause was hers. As Clara continued walking, she passed David Mitchell and Brittany Parker in the hallway. Their greetings were polite, but tight. Measured. Not from respect. From realization. They had once laughed about her in the break room. Ignored her by the coffee machine. Dismissing her with the casual cruelty power makes it easy. Now? They stood at attention. Because now they knew. The cleaning lady they'd ignored was the one signing their evaluations. And more than that, she remembered everything. At the end of the day, as Clara stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the runway, she reflected on the transformation still ahead. The challenges. The resistance. The quiet sabotage some would surely attempt. But she also thought of the passengers who'd never know this story. The ones who would simply feel the difference. Who would be welcomed with genuine kindness. Served with dignity. Protected by a company that now understood, excellence without justice is empty. That day, for the first time, Skyward Airlines began to lift, not just into the air, but into its possibility. And somewhere deep inside the machine, the uniforms finally looked up. Because the woman they once looked down upon was now leading them forward. Not for vengeance, but for something greater. A reckoning wrapped in restoration.